I run a research unit called Thematics. We are part of Corporates, Institutions and Investment Banking at Nordea. We have, for the past several years, every year done a big survey-based study, creating a report where we share the findings from the survey. And this is a joint project between us and our colleagues in transaction banking. We've done one this year as well, and as Anna mentioned, this is the gala premiere where I will share selected highlights. This is a compact version of trying to give you the most important and exciting things we have discovered in this year's survey. We call it Treasury 2025, and comparing what we have seen this time in the study with earlier years, in 2019 and 2018, we can see, for example, that when we asked treasuries of Nordic large corporates 2 years ago, they were very keen on having an influence in the digitalization of the businesses within the companies which they were part of. One kind of interesting observation last year was that there seemed to be fairly little perceived upside in how automated the various functions of the treasuries could become. And that really stood out given how much digitalization and technological development that we are seeing. Now, great to be able to ask questions again now and compare with earlier impressions. And on this theme of how much upside there is from digitalization and how determined treasuries are to digitalize, we can see in this year's study that actually it's only 12% of the respondents in the study where the treasury have a digitalization strategy as such. For those who have a strategy, it's 2/3 of the cases a specific individual responsible for it. Now, consumers, we see our behavior change. New technologies make new behaviors possible. This is exerting a lot of pressure on companies' business models to adapt to that, to our changed preferences, and to digitalize. Treasuries have a need to follow suit and make sure that they can deliver what needs to be delivered on the financial side in line with this development. And the question then is, are the treasuries actually involved in the digitalization of the business of the companies? And the answer is yes, but slightly, not so much. They have a say, but it's not really they who drive things. And this has a lot to do with the perception of the treasury function within the company. Is it perceived as a strategic stakeholder which should have a say in how we change our business in the company? And the answer to that is that, well, really only, if we exaggerate a bit, it's the CFO that considers the treasury a strategic stakeholder. The rest of the company doesn't. So there is a challenge here in trying to get there and have that influence that we saw a couple of years ago that treasuries want to have. We could say that we can describe 3 different types of treasury based on all the observations we've made in this survey and in this study. We've got the traditional treasury. That's a treasury that's not really too keen on change and spends a lot of time and effort explaining why things should be done the way they've always been done. There is the facilitator treasury, which is a helpful treasury trying to play its role in helping the business model to evolve, but which is a follower treasury and a reactive treasury. And then there is the role model treasury, which actually implements technological innovation itself and uses NXSs there to showcase its capabilities and use it as a platform to get more involved in how the business of the company is to digitalize. We have asked questions about today and 2025, and what we have asked both a couple of years ago and this time around is what level of automation do we have for the different functions within the treasury today? And comparing with 2 years ago, we can see that hardly anything has changed. It's roughly the same level of automation across the board. We haven't seen much progress compared with 2018. If you think that is an interesting observation, which I certainly do, what about what level of automation is expected for different functions within the treasury in 5 years, in 2025? What we have seen there is that expectations are actually lower today than they were when we asked last time a couple of years ago. So somewhat less ambitious views here. What skills do we find within the treasury? Well, looking at what they themselves think are the top skill sets in today's treasury for the needs that we have here and now, those are traditional classical treasury skill sets like cash management, FX, funding, etc. Those are clearly critical, and they are surely going to remain critical in a number of years' time. But when comparing with what the treasuries themselves expect to be the skills that they will need the most, or which will be even more important in the future by 2025, we can see that the ones which are seeing the most increased demand are more tech-oriented skills and skills like business development, which are clearly going to be key for being able to be there and offer all the financial infrastructure for the business model, which is digitalizing and evolving within the company. So a huge difference between today's core skills and the ones in 5 years' time. What impact will new technologies have on the business and on the treasury of the big companies? The overall broad answer is, well, treasuries expect there to be limited impact from new technologies, but there are some which stand out. And at the very top among the various technologies where we see an expected very substantial impact on the business are technologies like advanced data analytics. And that one is the one that really stands out the most. Just consider that for the large corporates, the biggest ones of all the respondents in the survey, 98% expect that they will actually also implement advanced data analytics in their business model within the next 5 years. That's what I call a pretty strong consensus, and that shows us very clearly what the key drivers are for the business models to digitalize. Right. Now, a nice thing about this year's survey, which we haven't had as part of the surveys in previous years, is that we've asked questions both to finance representatives from the treasuries, but also from people from the business side, mainly in business development and innovation. And here we can compare the answers of, is the treasury going to be involved in how the company is digitalizing its business, or isn't it? And we see, which I guess is kind of expected, that there are gaps here. The people from the business side don't expect the Treasury to be as involved in helping to outline how will we get more digitalized, how will we change our business model, as the Treasuries do themselves. But important to notice, just to try and be a little bit positive and proactive here, that of the top 5 categories, where in all cases the business is more skeptical than the Treasury itself to if Treasury is actually going to have a seat at the table and decide how do we digitalize our business, the areas which stand out where the gaps are the smallest among the top 5 are areas which are closely related to payments, and that is what Treasury does, and their Treasury has an opportunity to actually use that competence, and that being their responsibility, to be able to find a seat at the table, to be involved in also how the business model is to transform operationally. When asking about innovation, we asked here, where do you find the potential upside from benefits that innovation that you do would bring? And what really surprised me here is that they are mostly concentrated on the internal side, cost and efficiency, whereas the actually least expectations found are on the revenue side in gaining market shares or growth. So very much internal focus for what the upside that innovation can bring is. Where does innovation happen in the company? Overwhelmingly, they have answered that it's in the actual business units, in the local business unit, to a much lesser extent in centralized innovation functions. So out there with the customers in the field, that's where we see it happen. Right. Looking at the different functions within the company, the top 3 areas where innovation is happening is in product development and in business development and in IT. I think few of us are going to be very surprised about that. Again, similar pattern to the last observation, very little innovation relative to that on the commercial side, on the sales side of the business. And one particularly important observation for treasuries is that they are perceived, the treasury is perceived to be one of the least innovative areas within the entire company. Not a great starting point if you want to be involved in deciding how do we digitalize the company's business, if you're not really perceived to be a contributor of great ideas. How successful is innovation that is done in the companies? Okay, not fantastic, but okay. If you're wondering, the headline there contains a hidden little quote from the fantastic TV series Chernobyl. Don't miss that if you haven't watched it already, hence the good, not great. What is being described as the constraints to why it's not fantastic, but rather good, is really organizational issues and the lack of certain critical skills. Another way of looking at it is, what is not a problem? Well, money. It seems like funding budgets for doing innovation is not really what holds companies back. It's more these organizational issues and having the skills within the organization which would be needed to get somewhere. Innovation in these large corporates, perhaps not so surprisingly given that they are large, mature corporate businesses, is incremental. It's not crazy, wild moonshot ideas. It's all about getting more out of what already exists. And if we try and add all this up to, if you're in a treasury, in a company, in a finance function, what should you take away from all this? What should you do? Coming back to the desire that treasuries have expressed repeatedly to us in our surveys, that they want to be a strategic decision maker, they want to be a strategic stakeholder, we would sum this all up as that treasuries should change the perception of them. They should get closer to the business, they should build bridges to other parts of the company. They should make efforts to show their capabilities, to convince other parts of the organization that they are relevant, that they have a role to play in how to digitalize the business. They should not hesitate to innovate on their own within the Treasury and use any successes there as examples for how they can be relevant when there is innovation in the business, when there's a digitalization in the business. They should make sure that they have the skills that they need for all this within the Treasury and take those skills in if they can't develop them with what they already have. And they should see the evolving business models as an opportunity and make the most of the fact that they are often deeply involved in that they are in charge of payments coming in and payments going out. That is a very big part of data analytics. That's where the data is. There is a natural platform for the Treasury to have a view, to have insights, and to use that to be relevant. So plenty of opportunities. A bit surprising that we haven't seen a bigger step change compared with a couple of years ago, but all the potential is still there. Any of you interested in hearing more about this, don't hesitate to get in touch with your Nordea representative, and we will be happy to discuss more at length or in depth. Thank you from me for now.
So welcome over to me, Johan. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure having you here. You know, being a cultural anthropologist and listening to you is a little bit like listening to the future, right?
Thank you, Anna.
You know, I have received a couple of questions for you that I would like to ask you. So the first question is, how is it even possible that treasuries have lower automation expectations today in comparison with the last survey, if I understand the question right, you did in 2018?
It's really surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, it must, yes.
We're seeing all around us how much technology is evolving and how much society is changing. And then compared with a couple of years ago with the answers that we see, really nothing has happened in how automated the treasuries are overall for the total. I think part of the reason is that there have been obstacles, there have been difficulties in implementing automation. Most treasuries are trying to do that. And then with 2 more years having passed, because we're asking about the same time horizon, 2025. Back then that was 7 years out, now that's 5 years out. If you've lost 2 years in not making that much progress, well, the starting point is a bit more tricky. And then I think it's also perhaps a moderation of expectations, which were a couple of years ago, maybe also on the optimistic side.
Okay. So what do you think will happen to traditionalist treasuries in the future?
I think very few large corporate treasuries in the Nordic region out there want to be traditionalist treasuries. And when they are in that situation, it's probably because they feel that they have fairly little maneuvering room in being able to be helpful and being able to offer all the support and contribute to innovation that they theoretically might be able to. And I think that the only real option, if you don't want to be stuck in the traditionalist treasury role, is to find ways of becoming relevant. If you don't, and if you get stuck in all the limitations, not having budget, not having skills, the risk you take is that you become some variation of a pure execution factory.
So we won't see that many traditionalist treasuries in the future?
Hopefully not.
No, okay, there you go. So one more question for you. How could treasuries become more involved in evolution and digitalization of business models, would you say?
It's a good question, because the treasury is perceived in the typical large company as a very specialized function, being pretty much on the side, doing its thing, but almost being often a bit mysterious. And it's understandable, because many of the things that the Treasury does are very sophisticated and very complex. But in order for the Treasury to become more involved in the business, I think that a very good starting place is that you saw that the top technology that both people from the business and from the finance side expect to be implemented in the next 5 years is advanced data analytics. What is the data for a big company? Well, the data comes from what the customers are doing, right? That's from what the customers are buying. And when they buy something, they pay, and the payments are all processed by the Treasury. So the data comes to the Treasury. That's where it starts. And that, to me, suggests that there is an opportunity for many treasuries to use that and to show that they have an understanding of the data, they can analyze the data, and they can find ways of making use of that data, and that could bring them into that discussion.